Hey everyone, Jay here, and welcome to another Intro to Python Programming Lab. Today's Lab 3.9, we're going to be talking about the while loop. All right, so in programming, loops are when you want to test a particular variable and repeat the same actions over and over again, as long as that variable either stays true or it never changes in whichever way that you particularly define. And we'll look at a few different ways to define this as well. So the while loop is the most basic of the loops available, and technically speaking, it's the only loop you absolutely need. You could create all the other loops with a while loop uh, if you were so inclined. However, the for loop or the for each loop are super handy, and if you need their services, you would do well to use them and not try to recreate them. All right? Don't try to reinvent the wheel. If you have a wheel and you need a wheel, you use a wheel. So today we're going to use the while loop, the most basic and the most flexible of them, I suppose. And we're going to make the while loop four different ways. All right. The first way is the normal while loop. While something is true, we're going to continue to ask the user for input. Okay, that's what we're going to do in all these is ask the user for input. So this time, as long as the user continues to type in Y for yes, we're going to continue to loop. And as soon as they stop typing in Y and they type in anything else, we'll break the loop. And in the next one, we're going to do the opposite. We're going to ask the user to type in Y for yes and N for no, but we're going to continue to loop no matter what they put in as long as it's not N for no. So the first loop is we're going to loop every time they positively confirm they want to loop. And then the second loop, we're going to continue to loop until they tell us to exit. Okay, so that's kind of the opposite conditions there, right? Have loop every time you're specifically told to, and then the next one is loop by default until you're told to exit. Okay, and then the second two loops we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to ask for a number, and then we're going to use an if statement within the loop to test the value of that number. So the first and second loop are the same as the second and third loop, or the third and fourth loop, except that the third and fourth loop, we're going to add an if statement to that. Okay, so let's have a look at our completed code. There we go. All right, so I have my description comments at the top, like always. In this one, I've opted not to put my variable declarations at the top, and instead I put each loop's variable declarations near the loop. This is common practice, especially for something like loops, because the loop control variables oftentimes are not used anywhere else in your program. And so declaring them far away from the loop at the beginning of the program, especially in a large program, is just, we'll say it's just inconvenient. We want to declare it right at the loop, and then sometimes as soon as we're finished looping and we're done with that, we'll actually erase that variable and free up the memory. We're not going to worry about it in this program because it's a very simple program and we haven't gotten into clearing up memory yet, and we're not going to be using enough memory to slow down my computer anyway, or your computer. I don't care what computer you have. I only have 6 variables. We're not going to slow it down. So first loop, this is all this right here. Okay, so positive condition loop 1. All right, I'm going to loop every time I get that positive feedback from the user. So input 1, the default value, now I've set this specifically to be the default value of Y, which means that I set the value, and then when the loop starts, I'm testing while the input 1 is equal to Y or uppercase Y, lowercase y, or uppercase Y. Okay, we're doing that again. Okay, and so I preset it to Y the first time, so I don't have to ask the user from outside of the loop. Oftentimes you'll see the loops get primed, which is we'll do the first thing, we'll do basically the first execution of the loop before the loop. We'll prime all the values, and then we'll test to see if we're going to continue on with the loop. That's called priming the loop. That's kind of like a do-while loop, which we'll do it once and then continue on. I'm not doing the priming. I'm kind of priming because I'm just priming the value, but I'm not going to do any of the duplicated code. I'm not going to ask the user outside of the loop. I'm only going to do this once in the loop. So let's step through this, okay? Input 1 equals lowercase y, and then while it equals lowercase y or uppercase y, we're going to do whatever's inside the loop. And the way Python works is we don't have curly braces like many other languages do. We have this indentation. So all the lines that are indented, just this one, are going to execute over and over and over and over again until the loop breaks, or until input 1 stops being equal to either lowercase y or uppercase y. So we're going to ask the user, please input a y to continue looping or an n to stop. And they could input anything and it will stop. Okay, y will continue it, anything else will stop because we're not checking those values, right? So they're going to get the input 1, and if they input whatever they input will get put into 1, and then the loop starts over again. Okay, we're not going to get to this line right here, line 16 that prints. We're not going to do that until the loop finishes, until it breaks, until input 1 stops being equal to lowercase or uppercase y. So every time the user inputs, it's going to keep looping, or it's going to stop looping. Okay, when it stops looping, you might be confused your first time and say, okay, I've read the input, it's equal to y, we're going to keep looping. I've read the input, and eventually it's going to be equal to n, and we're going to stop looping. When we stop looping, yes, the while stops. I guess the while is written up here, but it's going to skip all the contents. If I say y, input 1 is equal to n right from the beginning, this loop will check the very first time. It will say, nope, not equal to y, and it will just never execute that loop, not even once. Okay. So as soon as it's equal to anything other than y, this is not going to happen again, and we're going to fall to the next line, and I'm printing out an output that says the loop was exited with the input of, and we'll show whatever that input was, okay, for you and me, so we can see in our output, we can see that record of what we put in there in order to exit the loop. Right? So that's loop 1. Loop 2 is the same thing, but remember, we're doing the opposite test now. Instead of testing to see if it's equal to y, we're testing to see if it's not equal to n. And remember, not equal to is this exclamation point equals sign, that is not equal to. So as long as input 2 is not equal to a lowercase n or an uppercase n, we'll continue. And we'll do that loop over and over and over again. They can put y, they can put a, b, c, d, e, f, g, they can put any input, but as long as it's not n, the loop will continue. But once they put in n, the loop will exit. Right, so that's the second loop. All right, moving on to loop 3. In loop 3, we're going to have a control variable that is going to be set to true by default. And then I'm going to have my input variable, which is also going to be set to 1 by default. Okay, so I've separated out these two variables. One is my user input and one is my loop control. Big reason for this is because you cannot trust user input. Right? We can't we really shouldn't be taking user input and using that to control a loop or anything, really. Okay, so this is a little bit more robust. We're going to say the loop is going to continue to loop as long as loop control 3 maintains its status as being true. Right? As long as loop control 3 continues to be true, the loop is just going to keep looping over and over and over again. We're going to continue to ask the user to input, and we're going to validate that input. So how we're going to do that, we say input 3 is going to be equal to, I'm casting as an integer, okay, so it's going to be equal to an integer of whatever the user inputs. Please input a 1 to continue looping or a 2 to stop. If the user inputs a 1, now we have this cool unique to Python command called pass. Now this is when I don't actually want to do anything. If input 3 equals 1, I don't actually want to do anything, so I'm going to pass. Python, because it requires us to have indented controls for our sections of code, we can't just leave this blank. So that's why the keyword pass was created, so that I don't want to do anything, I don't want to make any changes. As long as they continue to input 1, we're going to carry on with this loop. If they input anything else, we fall into the else clause, and we're going to take loop control and set it equal to false. Note that in Python, true and false, the T and F are capitalized. Every language may be slightly different in this, okay? Some are all uppercase, some are lowercase, some don't really matter. So make sure that you pay attention to which language you're in and whether you're supposed to capitalize or not with your true and false. So if the user inputs anything other than 1, anything else, we're going to set the loop control 3 to false. Once loop control 3 is set to false, the while loop is going to break out. It's going to say, okay, it's false, we're done looping, and when we are done looping, we will print out this message, loop exited with input and whatever the input is. So this time we kind of are trusting the user input and we're just outputting it back to the user. The last loop, the negative loop, okay, with the variable in here with the loop control and everything, this is going to be just like we did before with our loop 1 with our positive loop and loop 2 with our negative loop. So we'll loop as long as they keep doing Y, or in this case, we stop looping, or we can continue to loop until they give us an N. Okay, so those are two options. In this one, we're going to keep looping as long as they give us a 1, and the second one, we're going to keep looping until they give us a 2. Okay, so this is the negative condition. Once they give us the negative condition, that's when we stop. In the previous one, we loop as long as they continue to give us the positive condition. Okay, so they start out the same. I have my input set to 1, I have my loop control set to true. Because the loop control is set to true, the loop is going to cycle the first time automatically, regardless of any input, because we're not going to be asking for input until we get within the loop. Once we do, we're going to ask the user again, please input a 1 to continue looping or a 2 to stop. Turn that into an integer by casting it as an int, put it in the input, and then we're going to check and see if it's equal to 2. If it's equal to 2, we're going to set the loop control to false. If it's not equal to 2, we don't even have a section of code for that because we don't care about the else clause in this one. I could write an else pass. I could do that. But we don't actually even care enough to do an else pass because an else pass is just no code, right? So let's save that. Now we've gone over all of our loops. Let's run this and give it a little bit of a test. Right? So it's going to do the first one. It'll do a few inputs on that. And we'll do the second one, a few inputs, and so on. Right? So let's run that. All right, we're in loop number 1. please input a Y to continue looping or an N to stop. So as long as we input a Y, and I can do an uppercase Y or lowercase y, as long as I input a Y, we will continue looping. As soon as I input anything other than a Y, we'll test that by putting in an S. All right, loop exited with input S. Now we move on to the second loop. The second loop, please input a Y to continue looping or an N to stop. The second loop, this is the negative condition. As long as we don't give the correct negative condition, we'll continue looping. So I can put Y, we'll continue. Whoops, I actually put in nothing there on accident. I put in a blank. As long as I don't put N, and if I put NM or NN or HN or whatever, right, as long as I don't put in N by itself, we will continue the loop. And I can put numbers, okay? As soon as I put in that N, loop exited with input N. Okay, so the first loop will continue as long as we positively tell it to continue, and it will exit as soon as we give it anything else. The second loop will continue no matter what we give it until we give it that negative condition. Right? And then loop 3, this is going to ask us specifically for numbers, right? 1 to continue and 2 to stop. But if I put in any other numbers, oh, that's right. The first one, we have the positive condition, right? So I need that number 1, and anything else will exit. And now I've exited already prematurely without thinking it. And then in the last loop, this is the one where anything will continue except for number 2. And I pushed enter with no input and caused an error, right? Invalid literal for an int, okay? Because I put in a blank, and if we come down to loop 4, a blank input cannot be cast to an integer. So that's where that error came in here. Okay, so if I were to run this again and just try and skip that error, no. All right, now we're down to the fourth one. As long as I don't put in a 2, and as long as I don't put in anything other than a number, what if I type a number? Nope, Python doesn't convert text-based numbers to numbers, okay? So that one has to be digits, and it should really be an integer. It shouldn't be decimals either, right? But it will continue to loop as long as I put in digits and I don't put in the number 2 on that last one. Okay. In the future, we'll get a little bit more robust with our error handling and our handling of user input. But for now, we've seen a little bit of error handling, and we've seen 4 different while loops. We've seen looping on the positive condition, looping on the negative condition, and then positive condition with a more advanced test for that condition, and a negative condition with a more advanced test for that condition. And so that is all we're going to do with while loops in this lab. We'll be using while loops a lot more in the future. They're very fundamental to all things programming. If you want your program to continue to run, it's going to be inside of a loop. So that's while loops. That's lab 3.9. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.